Welcome to the adventures of self. Conversations with ordinary and extraordinary people as they explore what it means to be self-expressed. Come on in. Join the adventure.
So, welcome, Christopher Swift, to the Adventures of Self.
Thank you, Taylor. Lovely to be here. I didn't know it had a title, Adventures of Self. I like it. I like it.
Yeah, we're all about adventure. I think from what I know about you, from how we've connected, you are an adventurous soul in all sorts of ways. And I think we will get into that. I just want to pick up, because we were speaking just before we started recording about the milieu, the form of this as a podcast. And I like what you were saying about, because you're an artist and you likened it to having a gallery show.
Yeah, having an exhibition of your thoughts and ideas. Yeah.
Because it's different. It's different than what's interesting, and I recognize this in myself, right? I can have a conversation with any number of people and do, as we all do, of course, but to choose to come together for an allotted period of time, whether it's, an hour, give or take, is sort of the format of this show. It sharpens what it is, right? It's like, okay, well, now it's kind of showtime. And there's a realization for me that this is the time to really focus in and to work very specifically. I mean, it has a very dance-like aspect of working with, because it's me and one other person generally, of feeling out how this space is going to transpire.
Yeah, I had some thoughts about that, because it feels like the difference between practicing for a rugby game and actually being on the field. And just in the last 15 minutes, as we were preparing for this and energetically just checking in and kind of clearing the space so that we could be prepared for this. This is my third kind of thinking around what makes this podcast different from our normal conversation. And for me, it does that idea of an exhibition being a manifestation of those thoughts and ideas, which finally have to show up in a framework of time so that an audience can see it and understand it and perceive it and digest it. And also what comes with that, when you're on the field playing the actual game versus the practicing of the moves. There's some randomness there, there's preparation, but it meets the reality of what's at stake at the time. And I think this podcast, in its own way, because it goes out into the world and we have very little control over whose hearts these thoughts and ideas resonate with, whose ears they kind of prick, and who responds to it. And in very much the same way that you and I have got here, this whatever we create here in our conversation of honesty and our conversation of grappling with these life concepts and challenges and the adventures of overcoming those and getting to new precipices in our lives, by having those conversations and putting it in the public space, we're harnessing the universe's beautiful ability to take this and find some guy in Argentina, some person in kind of sitting in Finland, some guy in another that I otherwise wouldn't have met in Cape Town, and how it gets there. That's the beauty of and the synergy of the way that the world and the universe works. And for that, and it's funny I say that, but I realize that although I take that as a kind of breath of air, that's something that's just part of who I am and how I understand the world. I'm a faithful being, but it's also a strategy, and maybe we'll come back to that just now. But I also realize that I mustn't make the mistake of thinking everyone's in the same space. There's a large swathe of the population that actually can't permit themselves to accepting the gorgeous power and connectivity of the universe that can take something as singularly as this podcast conversation and find its way to the person that needs it, whether that be through for whatever the myriad of challenges and exciting things that you and I can compare, whether it be father, whether it's being a male, whether it's masculinity, whether it's earning money, whether it's being creative, whether it's being fun, all those aspects of adventure, kind of play themselves out in this podcast. Anyway, I'm running away with
thank you.
The possibilities of where this podcast could get to.
Well, indeed, this is rife with possibility. Sorry, just a quick technical note. Can you try to hold your mic I think it's rustling up against. It's just on your right cuff, the mic.
Yeah, that's here.
Yeah, it's actually it's right by your.
Oh, I see what's happening. I'm going to do my top button so it's not ruffling.
Right. Okay. Cool.
Just catching it and
yeah, it's like
a texture to the sound.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, this is rife with possibility, and it's our opportunity and our choice to come to hone that in. And what's interesting as well, whatever we create here, see, we can have something that we think we're doing and creating, and maybe this is true for rugby as well. Like, I mean, there is a much more because it's got rules and guidelines and points and all that. That how people interact with it varies differently. And I've come across people who contact me and tell me something they either like or don't like about the podcast, and it's quite remarkable because it doesn't really matter what it is. Oftentimes, I haven't thought about that at all, and it there is this sense, and I think it's true for podcasts generally, but this is very much because it is a conversational, perhaps some might say a little rambling at times, opportunity. It's not scripted, and we don't really know where we're going. I mean, we have an intention. You and I have come together to talk about things, and we will. I mean, let's start to get into them, but it is worthwhile to highlight, like what this is about, because it can take some time for things to unfold, and that's what I think the beauty of it is, because as we get to, it's sort of like you're settling into something, and yes, there are things that brought us together. And connected us, but there's something more intangible that we chose to create here, and I'm not sure what either of us really knew what that was, but we were talking about this. It's like we chose to have a connection, to see what would happen with a bit of uncertainty, right? And what's beautiful about that is that has a sort of a very lifelike realism to it. We choose to go into a relationship, we choose to go into a job, we choose to move to a new city, we choose to start a family, and there's this kind of like, okay, great, yeah, this is going to be exciting, and then one step later there's a bit of like, oh shit, what did I just do? I remember when I had this beautiful opportunity. I was working for a law firm in New York City, a very prestigious law firm, and I chose to move to Japan. A number of people thought that I was, crazy. I mean, including the people I worked with, because they said, "Why would you want to leave?" And I said, "Yeah, but like I have the support of this company, going to a completely new city, and all this amazing opportunity." But I did, I packed up all, because I moved for like a couple of years, and so I packed up all my stuff and I landed in Tokyo with whatever a couple of bags that I had before the rest of my belongings arrived. And I remember when I landed in Tokyo, I didn't know anybody. I knew zero people. And obviously it's a very foreign land. I sort of had a few basic phrases, but I didn't speak the language. I didn't know anybody. And I remember when I landed, I had this moment of, oh shit,
Yeah.
what have I done? I don't, why did I do this? And can I just stay on this plane? And then they can just fly me back to where I came from. And we just pretend that none of this stuff happened.
Totally. I actually even know the smell of the scene you're talking about. Yeah. It's happened a few times in my life, but there are these just very distinct fear, completely ice-chillingly fearful memories of, oh shit, and I can really resonate with arriving like you have in that totally foreign country, foreign languaging, completely different environment. That sets up the adventure, though, doesn't it? I mean, these are these balancing acts in life, isn't it?
Yeah,
the dating game is a bit like that.
Yes, yes, it is. And life in general, like when we think about it, see, I think as adults, particularly people who have, sort of office jobs, and maybe families as well, there is a temptation and ease, a sort of inertia to just kind of go through the motions because there's a presumed safety. Well, if I just do this from 9 to 5 or 9 to 6 or 9 to 9 or whatever the job requires, and I take the kids to school in the morning and I pick them up in the afternoon and we do this on the weekends, then everything's okay and it's safe and I know what's going on.
Yeah.
But that can be changed for all sorts of reasons at any moment, of course, right? People can have car accidents. You can be, the company can go under, right? You can be transferred. People can get
COVID
sick.
could happen.
COVID could actually happen and shut down the entire world. So, it's like there are no guarantees. So life actually is an adventure. It becomes even more so if you choose it consciously rather than kind of like letting it, the adventure sort of be foisted upon you.
Yeah, there's some very close friends of ours in South Africa immigrated to Cambridge in the UK, and they never called it an immigration. They continued to call it an adventure, and I liked their approach because it wasn't fixed. There was the loose ends and possibilities of a return or moving on from there, or possibly settling down or whatever it is. But it made the people they were leaving behind feel a lot more comfortable around their statement than immigration, because immigration immediately has this way of imposing itself on the people who are being left behind to really consider whether they need to, for whatever purposes, need to confirm that they're in the right place and that this is fine, or kind of tap into some of the rationale of what's driven that family abroad, whether it's fear or security. But the adventure, the actual statement of adventure, really changed the entire nature of what many other couples, which I've seen, heading abroad, for the prospects of a safer future, which is really just trading one set of circumstances for another set. And without being judgmental, I think that's appropriate for whatever your particular family or individual sets of priorities are. So I think it's important for you to find the environment or the perceived environment that's going to match your sets of principles and securities and comforts and adventure.
And we were talking before about you were talking specifically about the adventure of fatherhood, and how we were speaking about the experience of being boys who grow into men, and now you've gone on into to sort of complete the circle to become a father yourself.
It's funny. As you say that, I'm thinking of the analogy of this podcast, which then brought up the analogy of a rugby game, the actual game on the field, and the exhibition, instead of just the thoughts and the tinkerings and the conceptualizing of these various art pieces that get manifest in some sort of object there where their idea is materialized. And so that's it's the, and I like that it's all held together by this adventure or this idea or this concept of the adventure. By the way, I must point out that just as my friends called their moving to Cambridge an adventure, they stood out as using that metaphor. Others were emigrating and they've found themselves in a wholly different set of circumstances and how they were led to try and justify or explain or leave their loved ones, etc. And so what I'm really picking up here is that word of adventure, because it's a choice. It's a choice of how you look at these things. And I'm thinking of, it's understandable that people and families and individuals will want that kind of routine because of its sense of comfort that it brings, the security that routine brings. But that can be as dangerous as the opposite, with things changing all the time and nothing that's dependable. As human beings, I think we thrive somewhere in the middle of that. And I think that's what the word adventure gives for us, is this idea of heading into the unknown, into the arena, for the excitement. Because what happens is, there's the theory versus the reality. And to come to your point now, I've had an interesting upbringing in that my mom got married a few times, and she hates it when I bring this up because she feels like it's a reflection on her, but it's not a judgment on her. It's the outcome and reality of what happens when someone chooses 4 different partners who represent the father role for me in 4 separate ways, and then fast forward to a guy who became a father at the age of 40, so rather late. I mean, that's not uncommon these days. I think that's happening later and later. And I think there's another little commentary I want to make on that later. But it's the reality between the practice, the ideas of becoming a father, the ideas of being subject to a father, and living out as a son growing up, and then a young adult, and then a man, and then a provider. All those kind of things that roles we take on within this construct of ideas in Western society, and then you get to the actual kind of that white-knuckle experience when you're sitting in the plane at the airport in Tokyo and you've just landed, and the analogy being the baby's about to come out. There's no going back. When that child arrives, a father is born. That's something that I hadn't really thought about. I had all these concepts about the father that I'm not going to be, and I would say developing ideas of who I would be, against the backdrop of these four experiences I had of fathers, which is relatively unique. I think it's quite common that a lot of people grow up without fathers. That's becoming a huge thing, and then it's not that common to have the same 2 parents being the norm. I think that's started to become more of an outlier in our societies too. But having a situation where a person repeatedly gets married to create the 4 fathers influence is reasonably unique. I'm not making a judgment whether it's better or worse than anyone else's set of circumstances, but it certainly gives me 4 times the amount of imprints to kind of prepare for fatherhood. But the reality of becoming a father then is wholly different. And I think that is the signifier between the rugby game, the actual game, the outcome that happens in that 80 minutes, the actual exhibition, the unintended consequences and responses from an audience that you have no control over. And so the birthing of this baby into the world, or the taking that trip to a foreign land, or starting a new job, or these adventures, it's the excitement is the reality versus the thoughts. Of course, we have reasonable thoughts as to the risks versus gain, and we get involved in these things. We make these decisions, and then you have the reality, and then the game is on. The clock is on. You don't get to take the batteries out of those children anymore. You're now in the full fathership, and how you play this out over the next 40 years, and they're in stages as well, is very interesting. Yeah, maybe I'll stop there and just maybe I like that idea of the birthing of a father, and then look at the kind of the from nappies, literally the father nappies, the reality of parenting, versus kind of getting more things right than wrong, and learning from your mistakes, and then hopefully kind of really going to be able to mature into that and stretch your legs as concurrently this little being becomes a bigger being, an autonomous being, comes into its own sovereignty, and then finally enough practice and enough things of going right and security, but with enough change so that this child isn't completely dependent on you, and so and hopefully you are able to influence this completely unique character into the world, so that they have the best opportunities to take advantage of what's out there, whether it be in life experiences and earning capacities and love. The full spectrum of what it must be like to be a human for the blessing of the 70 odd years, or however long we get given to be on this planet, or in this realm.
What's remarkable in what you just spoke about when I was listening is that the pronouns you were using started to meld, and which we do. I think generally we kind of, we're not strict grammatarians or whatever the word is, and because at some point you spoke about the birth of the father, which I think is a beautiful concept, and because it was getting me to think that in a previous episode, I think it was episode 14, I was talking to somebody who wrote a book, Danny Levin, who wrote a book, The Mosaic, and we were talking about the concept that we think of a creator creating something, right? A book, yes, a painting, a child, but actually the creation also makes the creator. I mean, I think maybe Da Vinci or somebody from the Renaissance spoke about this, that the block of stone actually makes the sculptor.
Right? That Michelangelo analogy,
exactly. That
the statue. The statue is in there. He just has to carve away what's not the statue. That idea, right?
Well, not only that, but the carving of the statue doesn't. It's not that the artist. There's this weird sort of snake eating its own tail, that the artist is carving the statue, but in the process, and as an artist, I think you appreciate this, that the carving of that is what makes the artist. Because there was that capacity, that thing was not there, that capability, right? That it's only going through the adventure that you gain the gold, the knowledge, the experience, the whatever it is. And so what was fascinating, and so I'd encourage anybody and yourself to go back and listen, because you were speaking about things. You started speaking about like the raising of a child, but actually, as I was listening, you were equally speaking about the raising of a father, because what that gives, what that experience actually creates, and it goes to everything that we do as a creation, because and what we were speaking about from the beginning, this idea of adventure, when you break down adventure ad venir, it is that which is to come. That's all. But we have this sort of mythical, exciting, energetic concept to adventure, but it is literally speaking to something that is unknown, because it is that which is to come. But of course, that's all life, right?
Yeah.
And it's interesting, you were saying how the framing of an experience as an immigration or as an adventure changes the quality of that experience.
That's right. Almost sets it up in a certain way. What you were talking about there, it feels like feedback. All of these adventure experiences. It's the
Hello, Chris. Hello. Hello. Can't hear you. Can't hear you. Hello, hello.
Hi, Taylor.
Hi. I can see you, but you're sideways.
Let's see if I think what happened was
Oh.
the device went into power saving mode,
Right.
and then just cut it off. So I don't know how long into that.
The only thing, yeah, the only thing you started to say was feedback. Whatever I'd said was feedback, and then it went dead. So
Yeah,
we'll take it from there.
I think the feedback is interesting. When I was in my undergrad in fine art, there was a Scottish woman who came out, a professor from the Glasgow School of Fine Arts, I think, or the Glasgow University, and she was doing a postgraduate in the theory of the theory of practice. So, which is quite interesting. Like what you can't know without doing, which for theoretical university and very safe headspace people, I think it's a great subject, and it fell squarely into what we do as artists versus, say, the other kind of faculties of knowledge base. Our knowledge base is gained through trial and error, through the actual practice. So we're bringing theories and concepts into the real world and grappling with those. And often we have something visual or physical to represent those concepts. And I loved what she said. Is like what you can't know without doing. So the theory of practice, and I think that's what you were. The image I was getting when you were talking back to the analogies I was using is that there's something that can only happen in the adventure, in the life trial. And and it caters for everything. It caters for those who sit back or sit on their laurels or sit on their hands or don't do anything. It caters for those who brazenly kind of wade in where angels fear to tread, and it caters for those who somewhere in the middle as well. And but certainly no one is rewarded without getting involved. There are no easy gains, and I think life sets itself up like that. If you get something freely, your appreciation is understandably less than something that you've really worked for, something that and I also understand that in that are some traps. I think from what William was talking about too, is we sometimes rely too much on the kind of set economy of these things, whether it's input versus output, return of investment, X, Y, and Z, and that they often don't also cover what you can't see in a spreadsheet. And I suppose this is that the feedback is the reality of being a father in real time, the reality of being on that rugby field and facing that damage and the risk and the kind of just being in the flow and knowing exactly when to let that ball go and when to hold on to it and kind of and save it with and put your body on the line. And the reality of putting your thoughts and ideas out into that exhibition space, the reality of going and starting to learn the little bit of kitchen Japanese that you can to start building relationships in this completely foreign space. But because it's foreign, it has the ability to do what no other English Western space can do for you, right? Like you had to get to Tokyo. You had to get off that plane. You had to start those interactions.
Yeah, and then like what was amazing was how much it opened up. I mean, in my internal and external world, because not only did I have to get off the plane, then I had to navigate. Well, what does this mean, and what does it mean to be living here on a daily basis? And not that I'm sort of stuck here, but it's a choice, right? And it's an adventure that I consciously and purposefully chose. So rather than sort of sitting back and saying, oh crap, how do I minimize the damage and keep myself as insulated as possible in this, how do I actually live this adventure and make it a true adventure, sort of like these mythic kind of journeys that connect us, right? The movies, the fairy tales, but that's life, right? There's I like to say that I use a lot of mythological and archetypal thinking in the work that I do professionally, but also in my personal life, because the myths, the archetypes, the fairy tales, they're not sort of like they have this etheric kind of non-substantial quality to them, but that's just because they're timeless. Actually, they are often they're signposts, they're guideposts to what's possible. Not that they determine exactly what is going to happen for you, but they kind of give signposts of, well, if you follow this course of action, that leads to this pit of despair or troubles. Whereas if you follow a different course of action, this will lead you to a gold palace or the happily ever after concept, right? I mean, which is all sort of this ephemeral kind of thing, but it does bring to this idea, because I love that the theory of practice. What reminds me of is you see it in or I remember seeing it in an ashram where I was practicing yoga, and I've seen it in other spiritual texts that says an ounce of theory, an ounce of practice is worth a ton of theory. So it's one thing, and I, actually, as you were speaking, it reminded me, because I had a very intellectual background. I felt very comfortable in a way in my own mind, and I suppose was clever enough or studied well enough, or I don't know, did well enough with using my mind so that I got decent grades, I got a decent job. But I also at some point kind of felt trapped in that. It wasn't any real liberation for me And the the adventure that I've embarked on, particularly over the last few years, having kind of gone into intuition and coaching and self-expression, is much is much more, I don't know if it's perilous, it's much more of an adventure than anything I've done before. Yeah.
Wouldn't you say that you become a victim of your own mastery? What you've taken for granted and what you were able to be comfortable with intellectually and grade-wise, and which gave you a better advantage to get certain jobs, which came with certain salaries, which for your age was enough and more than enough than what you needed. Other people see that as their highest attainment, and they really work and sweat at that, and because they haven't had either the acumen or the support to be able to get to what someone like you may have then taken for granted. So you start mastering stuff for you actually doesn't feel like a challenge. So it's not an adventure, and you also start becoming aware of the traps of that mastery. And so therefore you self-create a new space for adventure, because that's on some level you must have known that that's important to keep on growing, right?
Yeah, I think as you were speaking, what comes to me is that sense of mastery. It's a bit like a puzzle. So like when you're young, you have these like puzzles to figure out, right? These kind of games, and well, let's figure out how to work that. And because it wasn't my puzzle, and I think that's the biggest distinction. So like I learned how to study well and answer essays and write well enough to get the good grade, to get the acknowledgement, to get the accolade. And obviously there is there's a reward in that. There's appreciation in somebody saying, you've done well, congratulations, here is your certificate or acknowledgement or gold star or the cupcake or whatever it is or here's your bonus that says we appreciate what you've done. And I can only speak for myself that more and more the sense that was somebody else's determinant, and it's like somebody else's pitch, right? It's like, well, I've got all these things to do and offer, and I'm coming on, and it's like you've determined every aspect of it. I sort of found it not even that I got to any real length of mastery. I mean, I spent 5 years working as an attorney, so I wasn't I wasn't a partner, I wasn't a master in that sense. But I felt like I understood the game well enough that it wasn't my game, it wasn't my sort of pitch, my rules. And like this isn't necessarily an admonition of people who do choose that, right? Everybody has to live according to his or her own values and determinants. It does remind me, Joseph Campbell speaks about following your bliss, whatever that is, right? That may be being an artist, maybe being a Wall Street attorney, it may be being a stay-at-home father or mother, or living on your own and a meek existence, and having a little shack where you fish and grow some vegetable, and that's what is your bliss. And he spoke about, because I think as he was sort of coming into his...
Was he the Heart of Darkness author?
No, that's
Joseph Coast?
No. So that was Heart of Darkness, Joseph Conrad. Joseph Campbell spoke about mythology. So he spoke about comparative mythology. He wrote the Hero with 1,000 Faces, which sort of compiles the concept of the hero myth, the hero's journey. That is a common story across generations, cultures, since basically time immemorial. And
Joseph Campbell, huh? Okay.
Yeah, and actually formed like his concept of the hero's journey is well considered the basis for what a hero goes through, whether that's King Arthur or
Mm.
Cinderella. These are both hero myths, and that it is an archetype that is common across cultures from across millennia.
Yeah, I think it's the hero's journey is so pivotal to the father journey, or to our life's journey, but certainly the role is, that I tend to in the role as a masculine entity. Yeah, definitely.
It is a masculine concept and archetype. It doesn't mean that
Yeah.
only men do it, right? So there are the likes of
No, I'm just talking from my
Cinderella.
perspective. Yeah, I'm just talking about. Yeah, I get that. So I'm just commenting from my particular masculine experience. Yeah, I can't comment on behalf of the Cinderellas of the world.
Oh, you may there may be a glass shoe out there that fits you.
But I think a significant part of this is leaving the home, isn't it? In the hero's journey, is the leaving of the comfort, the leaving of the known, which is what, to a degree. Let's just say you mastered things in a way that you found it wasn't as challenging, and you need to set yourself up for something which had such a drastic offering of adventure. And I mean, what more drastic than another culture? The opposite end of the world. It's expensive. It's there's so much to challenge there. Interestingly, my mom started her hero's journey with pretty much the same rationale, which was when my biological father, when he offered to marry her, he said it exactly like this: I'm going to South Africa on business in 2 weeks' time. Will you marry me? Well, I'm immigrating to South Africa in 2 weeks' time. Will you marry me? And she reflects that it was more the adventure of South Africa escaping Glasgow than the proposition of spending the rest of her life with this man. And I'm just edifying how important it is how those things are set up. So the adventure was there, and in a way, I feel like that's where you're getting to with the rationale that had you choose something like Tokyo.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I'll sort of peel back the layers a bit of how Campbell speaks about the hero's journey, because there is this sense like there is a choice, right, to leave the safe environment, to leave the home. And famously, like I think it's in The Hobbit, right? Bilbo Baggins, right? The Shire is this wonderful place where everything is lovely, everybody's friendly, and it's it's beautiful, but it's all very samey. And an opportunity comes for him to go off on an adventure, and he tells his fellow hobbits that he is going off an adventure, and one of them says, "But why would you leave the Shire? Everything is safe and known here, and out there it's unknown, and we don't know what it is." And it's just like famously kind of encapsulates that idea. It's like we live in a Shire world, and we have to choose. And Campbell says, and you can see it.
I don't want to skip over that, because you said that leaving the Shire was a choice, and I just want to emphasize that for you and I, we saw those as choices. Many people don't see that as even a choice. It's almost like the logic doesn't even allow them that option. It's like that's not an option. Why would you do that? That's that's what I feel like those people were feeding back to you, your colleagues and possibly your friends and family. Like, why would you go to Japan, right?
Well, so it goes to what I was just going to say, because what Campbell speaks about, and it shows up in all sorts of cultural references of the telling of this hero's myth throughout time, is that there is a call to adventure. So relatively early on, the hero is called to adventure. What often happens is the hero refuses the adventure. No, thank you. I'm not going off to put my life in danger. There's this in Star Wars. So George Lucas read Joseph Campbell's Hero with a Thousand Faces, and I mean, he says very openly, he says, this is a cinematic
Yeah.
cinematographic, but cinematic representation of a hero's myth. Absolutely. I mean, it follows it, you know, just like point by point by point. And when, because often, well, the hero will meet the quote unquote wise man, or the wise person, right? I mean, which can often be an internal thing, but usually is represented externally. So Luke meets Obi-Wan Kenobi, right? This sort of mysterious man who lives out in the caves outside of the city, and that he's heard about, this kind of mysterious old man. And Obi-Wan says to him, "You're a Jedi Knight. We've got to go off and save the galaxy." And Luke, who's grown up with his aunt and uncle, says, "I can't go save the galaxy. I have chores to do."
Yeah.
"Thank you very much. You can go off and save the galaxy." "I don't know what that means." "What do you mean save the galaxy? I'm a farmer. I know how to like play with droids and, you know, grow some vegetables."
Yeah.
That's who I am. So often we hear there is a call to adventure, and people, we refuse it. And the call can be reborn. We are recalled to adventure, and there is this choice. The hero must choose the adventure, and it's literally crossing over a threshold. And when we cross over the threshold, so it can be, you know, going into a magical land, going through a wardrobe into Narnia, going into a forest. Right? There are these ways that we cross over a threshold, something, a barrier that separates us from
leaving the safety of the city walls. Yeah.
Exactly. Walking, we are leaving the Shire, and on the other side is the great big world out there. And in that new land, that's a magical land. That's where adventure lives. That's where myths and magic actually happens. And what's really beautiful, right? You go through the adventure, you come across allies, you face your demons, which are just internal demons, but they're, again, externalized. So there are dragons out there that we must slay or pacify. And then once we overcome our challenges, slay or pacify our demons and dragons, we win the bounty, right? There's the gold hoard that is protected by the dragon that we gather up, right? The riches, which again are metaphoric. And then we actually have to cross the threshold back into the land where we came from and bring our riches back to where we came from. So in The Hobbit, right, when they slay the dragon and take the riches, they take it back to the Shire, and they actually, and all the lands that they pass through where they had challenges, they share out the gold with all these people. And that also is a choice. And it is another challenge in itself to share out what is learned from the adventure. Campbell talks about in the Hero with a Thousand Faces that there is also a refusal to share that out. So famously, the Buddha, after he had his enlightenment, was compelled to share what he had learned about the suffering of mankind and how to deal with that. Said, I don't know how to do this. I can't take this back. And people can get stuck there. But it is bringing those riches back and sharing them, whether it's with one person, whether it's with your community, however you choose to do that, it is how you complete the circle. And then you've kind of gone up a level, or you've changed, you've transformed yourself, and now you're on a new hero's journey. Yeah. And we were talking, I think when we first spoke about, because I think this ties in, what I get is this ties in quite well with your artistic journey.
Yeah, I was thinking as you were tail ending there, something recently happened, and that's, as an artist, and for the sake of our audience, I stopped being a practicing artist pretty much when my son was born. So the birth of the father also came the birth of responsibility to producing, in my mind, a safety and a stability for my child, which I didn't have. And I'm not even saying that in a way that it was judgment in a negative way, because I understand that I am the person that I am because of the change that I was subject to, moving to, going to 10 or 11 different schools, having 4 dads, moving town many times. These things gave me huge advantages over the person and the character that I am, and also, kind of big cheese-like, Swiss cheese-like holes of things that I've also other people take for granted that I don't have. Whether it be kind of maths or spelling. These are basic building blocks of how you understand yourself intellectually in the world and how you express yourself, and they have the ability of creating a sense that you're actually stupid or you don't know. So one could spend the time trying to overcorrect that or compensate that or believe the notions that come with that. So these are just legacies or aspects of the upbringing that I was subject to. And so when my opportunity came around to create the antithesis, or to create my version of childhood for my own children, stability and just one set of parents, maybe one junior school, one high school. These were the thoughts of what I thought would be the reward for my children. And of course, in that, like most people would want that, it's sensible. In that, you kind of, you're landing your children back on kryptonite. Those powers that I got from moving around are kind of are limited by bringing me into a space where I stepped out of the belief system for creativity and went to something a little bit more dependable.
And I think it can be common to, like, the pendulum swings, right? So you have an experience of 4 fathers, and it's not that that's good, bad, or indifferent. It's just an experience, right? It's something that you live through, and somebody else may have an experience of a very nuclear 2-parent household, and they either choose to recreate that, or I think from your experience, there's a choice of going through that and recognizing perhaps the value of that, but also the struggles and the challenges of that, and so you make a conscious choice, as you say, even to put your own art and self-expression, well, at least that version of it on hold, to focus on what it's like. There's a value judgment there.
Yeah,
what's important.
Actually, where I was leading with that, before I got dissolved into the description, is that more recently a major artwork of mine sold. Had very little to do with me at this point, although I'd got this work to London, and then from London went to Oslo, and then so it was sitting in a garage, and so someone else sold that for me, and but it represented a significant income, but not just an income that will be a great windfall for myself and my family, but an income that also signified validity in the power and the uniqueness of what I was creating and putting into the world. I was just possibly ahead of my time, or I hadn't been able to translate my understanding of how unique and how important this material or this artwork is to someone else. And it's funny how in the art world, how the purchasing aspect of that equation lends a huge feedback to the work in itself, the sense of the value of that work. It's unfortunate that the purchasing of the work and who purchases it for what reasons makes to the work in itself. It should have its own value, and of course it does have its own value. But it's funny that once there's some purchasing in that, someone else has validated the sense of value, or the sense of value in that concept, in that idea, in that intervention between the artist and that materiality. What's been manufactured or created now has a wholly different value relation to what that material was before, to what it is now. For instance, getting back to that analogy of carving the Carrera, kind of marble away and ending up with this beautiful statue. But until that gets sold, a lot happens there, in that there's a kind of there's a failure on some, on an economic well, there's a failure, the failure of not being able to turn those concepts into an economy that would be able to keep me in the trade of creative art. And so I had to step out of that space to go and do something more dependable, so something salary based, to create that dependability for the family, which I was not prepared to do because of my experiences of moving and the disharmony of constantly changing. So I think I'm just picking up on our previous point around the adventure having a feedback loop. There's the reality, the theory of practice, the actual practice, what we cannot know without doing, that happens in that adventure for those who have the courage to leave the city walls and go into that other world and to experiment in that hero's journey. It's funny because all these narrations of the hero's journey will kind of be focused on that hero who comes back. But along these ways, I kind of think tongue-in-cheek to myself around the illustration of the people who die in these stories, whether they be armies or horses, or each one of those people was a hero in their own little kind of citadel who left and didn't make it back. This beautiful story completes because the hero overcomes these massive massive kind of challenges, and then comes back with the loot or the experience, and brings back some sort of gain. But with all of these dramatic Hollywood versions, and even the story ones, they're made interesting because of the literal illustrations of people dying, not making it through the quagmire, not making it through the prisoner of war camp, not making it through the sandstorm or whatever it might be. That those aspects are not lost on me. In fact, with a big smile on my face, I mean, there's an anti-hero story to be told as well. I think a kind of which gives me an idea for some artworks, to tell the reality, and the reality of why you and I are here talking. We're talking about our experiences, and yes, while we've had some courage, we've also suffered significant failures or significant setbacks, which have informed us either to sit down, or we've got up again. We've overcome that with courage again, or we've been stupid enough to do it again and pick it up and try again. And then in that way, I think life does reward your courage of being able to retry and do it again and again. But I just wanted to end on this little loop, which is to say that significantly, and maybe life, in fact, not just maybe, I can actually state that life isn't a one size fits all. I think what we sometimes do with our templates, because I have a question for you, Taylor, which is the idea of a younger man and their propensity towards adventure versus older, middle life to later life, and how that seems to curtail. Does it curtail, or does it, or do we just maneuver the risk into other places. But we'll come back to that. But having this windfall recently has come at a time where I think I've created the stability for my family and for myself. I've proven the ability to be able to earn a salary and create financial stability and security and convenience and comfort for my family in a relatively short amount of time, to the point where it was necessary to achieve that for my family and also, in a way, close a loop of my own childhood experiences, and so remove the embarrassments that I was subject to, and so create those for my children. And this windfall possibly comes to what you were saying, was just putting a pause on that creativity as an economy. And now that this windfall has happened, it's met me at a time where my wife and I were thinking towards moving out to the country and following on things which are not the norm, which are not, many people like the idea of it, but not too many people are in the mindset or in the or even have the choices to be able to take this adventure of taking our family out to the country and live sustainably off the grid. I don't know whether I completed that. I feel like I just wanted to kind of finish the picture, which is in the boldness where we've already had made our decision to do that. And in a way, I feel like the universe has come and complimented us towards that. We didn't make the decision because of the windfall, but the windfall has come as a comfort and almost as an envoy to the charter of this next adventure of Hero's journey into the country, into sustainability, into an appropriate part of our lives as a family, because there's different stages in this growing of the father and the growing of the children.
I think what's interesting to me, because what I'm getting is there is this. And it's interesting because listeners may or may not be aware, but we had some technical difficulties. We kind of started at something and then started recording. Then we were kind of cut off, and there is this sense, because we've kind of created this realm where we kind of taken things a bit out of
context,
but not context, out of order.
Right.
And there's a bit of the time has been kind of sliced and diced, and it's interesting because I think that's playing out in what we're discussing. So, see, like when I listened to that story, there's a part of you that felt like, well, you did something, and like this piece of art that had its own, like you chose to move away from that and then start another adventure, and then at some point later, that came full circle, and as you say, this windfall came, and I think it's worthwhile because life and adventure are not necessarily linear, so things can be out of sorts, out of context, out of order, because we think, okay, if I do XYZ today, then 1, 2, 3 is going to happen tomorrow, and
yes.
that's how life is. But actually, we don't. When you go into magical realms, time and space are on a different order. So where things happen and how things happen and when they show up can be very, very different.
Yes.
And so, but what's it? What I do recognize in you is as that. We'll call it the initial arc of that particular adventure, the artistic adventure, now comes to an end. It actually propels you into the next adventure, whatever you choose for it to be, for yourself as a father, for your family, for your own artistic expression. And it leaves me in this sense of I actually really like the space we're in now, and feel like I want to bring this to a close, not because we've completed anything, actually because we are at the cusp of, there is this, cusp of this new adventure that I want to actually leave myself, you, and the listeners in, because there's an incredible sort of charge and expectation of what to do with this.
Yeah.
And that is really the essence of adventure.
And also, I think it speaks to an earlier point we made around, I'll call it value perception, around the concept of getting something free or getting something easily. Really kind of does one a disfavor sometimes, in that you don't really appreciate what it is you have. And we know this, and our listeners know this in many ways. It can be fresh water, it can be uncontaminated food, it can be security, it can be financial, and there's so many ways of this. And so you don't really understand the value of this thing until you don't have it, right? And so in the same way, I was thinking of what you're saying around time continuums. They seem to warp outside of our control and our, kind of, okay, we do 1, 2, 3, and we expect a result in X, Y, Z time. And I've found, and maybe this is a maturing, that especially when it came to business, that was one of the biggest lessons, is that you put that time and effort in, but it never kind of pays itself off quite as quickly as you expect it to. But you've got to stay in the game, and it does mature. It will come. It does come. You've got to have the faith, and you've got to. And I think that speaks somewhat to the instantness of our generation that just expects things in a certain way. And if it doesn't arrive, then they give up, or they stop pursuing, or it's not worth the effort. And I could say in a lot of my adventures, I've often come to a point of reflection of, shit, if I knew how much effort, or if I knew the attrition, if I knew the challenges, if I knew the difficulties of what this would have taken up front, I would not have got involved in this. No way. But, and this maybe goes to that point of that, there's Glaswegian, there's the Scottish professor, which is the theory of practice, is that having children is exactly to this point. Is that once you've inseminated, once the orgasm is kind of worn off, it's coming. It's going to happen. 9 months later, that child's coming, and you've got this life force, and it grows, and it becomes what it is, and there's no turning back. And so it should be, because life has its own ability, a bit like Obi-Wan Kenobi, who has more wisdom, and he just knows. He knows ahead of Luke, before he goes on an adventure, that certain things are necessary, and you do need to kind of leave the city limits, and you do need to have this adventure. And if you had known what's out there, if you'd literally known what's out there, you wouldn't go. And maybe that's what some of those people do know, and they don't want to adventure there because they believe they will be the kind of the fallen bodies along the way during the war. They're not the hero or the center point or the focus point of the story. And it's necessary that time has its own lessons. And if this work hadn't taken 11 years to sell, it may have gotten in the way of me learning what I needed to learn in business, for instance, to stabilize my family, or to outmaneuver my low self-esteem, for instance. So all of these have been very necessary, and in God's good time, or in the universe's good time, or in creativity's or adventure or courage's good time. These are all the necessary and understandable in retrospectively anyway, 2020 vision looking back. They're very necessary. If we had them on order, we'd order all those successes now. But I think what I'm learning from this is that there's a time and an attrition and appreciation that needs to happen. That pot needs to cook. It's not instant. And sometimes even after it's cooked, leaving it till the next day tastes even better. So these things have their own time and flavors, and they come out, and that blossom can only blossom under certain circumstances and through certain seasons. And there are these wheels within wheels, that our generation often becomes impatient with, because we've been sold some sort of instant gratification. But anyway, I seem to be opening up other areas of interest, but maybe I'll just finish there with saying the panacea, or the comfort of all of this, is that time takes time, and that in the end, if you pursue it and you keep at it and you keep on getting at that, the rewards will manifest, the rewards will show themselves, maybe not necessarily monetarily or in an object, but the lessons and the feedback and the experiences and the relationships that are built and the things that could not have been possible without leaving the city walls is the adventure. And there's that beautiful saying, which is, the destination is the journey.
Yeah.
You know, that's or the journey is, no, the destination is the journey. That's right. So it's not about landing there. It's everything that you experience in getting to that place that you're trying to get to, right?
Beautiful. Thank you, Chris. This has been an absolute journey and an adventure. And thank you for taking time to come on the show. There is much more to explore, so we will have to open up a new adventure somewhere down the road.
Certainly, I appreciate it, Taylor, and thanks for being so open. And which has created space for me to be open and just pontificate and thrash out some of these ideas which I otherwise would not have had the need or the necessity to really size up, relook at, and reorder. Yeah, thank you.